So after playing over 10 hours of the Elden Ring Nightreign network test, I have to say I've never been more mixed on a gameplay experience in my life. Elden Ring and these Souls games in general are some of the best experiences in gaming to me. The build variety, level design, and bosses are all top notch, and I even love diving into games inspired by them. But the games inspired by them usually rarely come close to matching that quality set by From Software, which is where Elden Ring Nightreign comes into play, because at times, it feels like I'm playing a game inspired by From Software, made by fans, not a game made by them, which is really odd to say, but I don't know any other way to put it. But with that said, what exactly is Elden Ring Nightreign? Well, it's a roguelite Souls-like where you choose a class and venture forth over a 3-day time limit that will have you battling bosses at the end of each of the first 2 days after being pushed in by a fiery circle that then leads into a day 3 confrontation with the big bad Night Lords, the main bosses of the game, and of course all of these runs have you starting at level 1, so you need to work quickly to level up, so when you get forced into these confrontations with these bosses, you are prepared. Now this gameplay loop, I really didn't like it at first. It felt so jarring compared to a typical Souls experience, instead of that normal, slow-paced progression where you are taking the time to learn the area where enemies are at, what their mechanics are, and gathering items. It felt like the gas pedal was slammed down instantly and I was told to go. But the more I played, the more I understood what the game was asking of me, the more I started to enjoy it, because I realized it was asking me to let go of that Souls-like expectation. It's not built around that gameplay style, it's built around a much more fast-paced action RPG style, and once I accepted that, I could hardly put the game down. But that doesn't mean I didn't have issues with it, and I know this was a very limited test to mainly test the network servers, which likely I somehow didn't have a single issue with compared to others. With that said though, I have some concerns about the gameplay loop becoming too one-dimensional over time. Let me explain. So before diving into a run in the network test version, you started off in a hub area where you could choose one of 4 characters to run around with and practice their abilities before going into a match. Since each character basically represents a class, and even though you can pretty much use any weapon you want during a run with these classes that you come across, there's absolutely choices that are better for some characters compared to others, and I also want to note, I feel that there needed to be a better explanation on how the abilities for the classes worked. I say this because even though people probably didn't actually go into the training area before trying out a character, I've seen so many people misusing abilities all the time. People playing as Recluse, which is the witch always having no mana, even though she has an ability that recovers mana, or people using Guardian's Dive ability as an attack instead of a defensive move to help your teammates. So I really hope in the full game they have a way of relaying those abilities better to players. Now after running around and messing in the training area, it's time to dive into a match, which I didn't mess with the password matching or even try to play solo. I just launched straight into matchmaking for the entire playtest and played with randoms because I wanted that authentic random experience to see how it would evolve throughout the playtest, which ended up being actually interesting, but I'll get to that later. So once you match with 2 other players, since team sizes are 3, you then choose your character and people could play as the same character, so there's no restrictions there, which I was happy to see. Then into the match you go, and from there you drop into a predetermined spot, then you're racing against time to level up so you can take down the bosses. So what do I not like about this? Well, what I don't like is what it evolved into throughout the playtest. At the start, going into a match, everyone kind of ran off on their own, killing random enemies, trying to learn the maps with no real teamwork, with people dying in the dumbest ways possible, which it probably didn't help there was no voice chat in the network test. But as everyone started learning how to play, people started sticking together, and every match someone would take the lead. What I mean when I say that is someone would mark what area for everyone to go clear, and then continue to mark each area after, making them basically the guide of the team. Which is what I basically ended up doing in a ton of matches. I would lead my team through the most efficient route possible to make sure we would be as strong as we could be. Why is this bad? Because the game basically devolved into a boss rush mode because of the time limit and how well bosses reward players, since killing bosses give the most souls for leveling, the best weapons, and passives. So every single match in the playtest basically turned into landing, running by enemies, kill boss, get reward, level up at grace, then run by more enemies to kill the next boss and repeat till the circle closes in as the day ends and you fight whatever boss you got matched up with depending on your map. Which you can see why this got stale over time for me. Even with completing runs with all 4 classes, there comes a point where it all just melds together despite how different the characters feel to play. Now I do believe there are some ways to make this better though, because the whole reward for completing a run, at least in the network test, is getting relics, which are color coded that have different passives that you can equip to your characters before going into a match. And by the end of the network test, I no longer felt weak at all at the start of matches. These passives can be crazy good and led to the game actually feeling almost too easy even when playing with random people. But that's okay. Difficulty can be increased in a variety of ways by doing stuff like mixing up enemy spawns to keep areas unpredictable, even when running the same map, or like how that absolute menace that is Morgott randomly shows up to interrupt your fights, which created some of the most fun moments and tension I felt when playing the game. Now, as for how I believe they could make runs less stale based off of what we experienced in the network test, first, let us land where we want to start a match. This would instantly add some cool variety to matches and allow players to at least get more creative with the routes they tried to speedrun. Next, have more enemy clearing objectives. They sort of have this in some spots where there is a boss health bar, but you are basically clearing out an enemy camp. I really like these since it's not about running straight to where a boss is at, but about exploring the area to kill all the enemies, because while it's different from a traditional Souls game, I feel like that exploring and enemy clearing needs to be a bigger part of the gameplay loop, which I feel like these clearings should be the only way you get rewarded something like a Stoneward Key. That way you kind of mix in that traditional gameplay loop of Souls games in a more organic way. Explore, clear enemies, get key, go fight boss as a reward, get special upgrade for run. Doing this would be a great way to really keep the gameplay fresh. Next, they have merchants and a smithing station to upgrade your weapons, but this felt meaningless. The weapons that dropped from bosses always just felt more efficient time-wise to get and easily did the job when it came to killing enemies. The only fix I could see to this is doing something like getting rid of smithing and making it to where you spend souls to upgrade your weapons instead. That way you have that choice of do I upgrade my stats or my weapon. I believe that would add a very interesting dynamic to the game, since when it comes to upgrading stats, you don't choose what stat to upgrade, you just click upgrade and your stats go up. Then the only other option I can think of is making runs longer, like it's not a 3-day cycle, you can make it a 5-day cycle, or 8-day cycle where you're fighting multiple Night Lords. That way you have more time to not only get a good weapon, but to also look for upgrades for it. Which I also need to say before I forget, the one Night Lord we got to fight in the network test, Gladius, is a sick boss fight. It makes me really excited to see what the other Night Lords are like, because if there's one thing they do get right above all else in this game, it's how good it feels to fight these bosses with everyone using their abilities together to take them down. But with all that said, despite my issues and concerns I still have, I am cautiously optimistic about Elden Ring Nightreign. This could be absolutely amazing or fall flat on its face. It's definitely interesting seeing From Software take a stab at a multiplayer focused game like this, and while it does at a surface level seem like an asset flip cash grab, there is more going on here that does enough to make it more than just that. Though what will ultimately decide that is what the content and final gameplay loop is like when the game releases in a few months. Basically, there better be a Dark Moon Greatsword in this game.